So we're going to be very ambitious tonight. We're going to try and solve 3 of the world's biggest worries and concerns. Yeah. It's actually in the Torah. It's not me. We're not doing anything. We're just extrapolating from the Torah. Parashat Chayei Sarah is this week's Torah portion. There was a sign, I've shared this before, but it's always good to say it again. On my father's office wall, it said, "Why worry?" There's only 2 reasons to worry. Either you're well or you're sick. If you're well, there's nothing to worry about. If you're sick, there's 2 things to worry about. Either you'll get better or you'll die. If you get better, there's nothing to worry about. If you die, there's 2 things to worry about. Either you go to heaven or you go to hell. If you go to heaven, there's nothing to worry about. Having a good time. If you go to hell, you'll be so busy chatting with your friends, you won't have time to worry. So why worry? So what are the biggest worries and concerns that we have? Well, for some people, their relationships, married life, non-married life. It's the elusive happiness in a partnership, in a relationship. The other one, obviously, is health and the fear of mortality, fear of I won't live forever. And the third is an ongoing, more general communal issue, which is the Jewish people never having peace in the land of Israel, and the constant battle between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac, which were the 2 children of Abraham we spoke about last week, that went their own paths, but they're both from Abraham. They're both from the promise of you will be great nations. It's just that the great nation of the Jewish people and all the blessings that came along with that were channeled and sent down the direction of Isaac and not Ishmael. When it came to that who will inherit you, the Torah is very clear in this week's Torah portion. It will be Isaac that will inherit you. And Ishmael actually accepts that. But we're going to see from this week's Torah portion, amongst other things, but the answer to these 3 worries, concerns, crises that we often think about, at least there'll be one approach that we can take to all of them that might give us a little bit of an antidote, a little bit of improvement. So Parshas Chayei Sarah is called the life of Sarah and immediately talks about her death. So what a strange choice of names to name a portion, the life of Sarah. It should have been either the death of Sarah, the life of Isaac and Rebekah, which is a big theme in this week's Torah portion, the next generation. Quick Hebrew school quiz. Founding fathers: Avram, Yitzchak, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Founding mothers: Sarah, Rebekah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Now, Sarah and Avraham, husband and wife. Yitzchak and Rivka were husband and wife. And, of course, Yaakov had Leah first and then Rachel as his 2 wives. So just so when we reference all the people, it's just important to keep in mind, because we're about to be introduced to Rivka as well, who is a wonderful woman, possibly one of the most overtly kind and generous of the 3 mothers, or 4 mothers. But the question why it's named the life of Sarah if she passes away is really the first point we'll address. But let's take a look at the inside verses, because it's good to know context. Page 133. Sarah's lifetime was 127 years. Vayu Chayei Sarah me'ashana ve'eshrim shana ve'sheva shanim. Shnei Chayei Sarah. She lived 127 years old. And that wasn't the oldest in those days. It's nice amount now. Wouldn't mind being 127 now, especially with that Rashi says she looked as young as she did in her 20s when she passed away. She did not age. As a matter of fact, age was an invention that came about when Avraham saw that everyone was confusing him and Isaac, him and Yitzchak, because they looked so similar. Cluster Panav, it says that their faces were almost identical. So Avraham says, Hashem, maybe there should be an aging process, that I can look a little older, more senior than my son, so they don't confuse us. So that was actually a request that was granted by Hashem, and that's why in this week's Torah portion it says, "Va'Avraham zaken ba bayamim." Avraham got old. It doesn't say that to any other person before this. People lived till 800, 700, 900 before there were any diseases and pollution and chemicals. And then after the flood, it went down drastically. Hashem said, I'm not going to be so merciful and give sinners such a long life, because then the world is bad for a long time. Imagine if people, who were evil would just continue to live generation after generation. So after the flood, it was shortened, but still a bit more than today, probably because better health and so on. There were people who died young, obviously killed and so on, but Avraham lived till 175. Sarah lived till 127. Yaakov also lived till the 120s. Rivka, Rachel, and Leah lived also just above 100. Rachel actually was less. She died in childbirth. She was in her 40s. And then we have the story of Yitzchak, who was the oldest living of our patriarchs and matriarchs. He lived till 180. So 185. Yeah. So that was the extension that was given to those. So it says that Avraham was the first one to actually ask to look old, because he wanted there to be a difference between him and Yitzchak, and that was indeed accorded to him by the Torah, saying he looked old. The other request from one of the forefathers was Yaakov. Yaakov said, I don't like that I'm about to face the end of my life, and I won't have an opportunity to speak and bless my children, because I don't know when I'm going to die. I could bless them now, but then I'll live for another 20 years. Or I could wait, but I don't know, because there was no illnesses. There was no way that there was a terminal illness, that someone died due to a demise. It was very sudden. When someone died, they didn't realize it was going to happen. Sarah dies, it was a sudden death. And Avraham comes and finds her, and he mourns for her, and no one expected it. And so that's why you could see that Avraham then says, I think I delayed trying to find a wife for Yitzchak, because now my poor wife won't see him get married. He was 37 at the time, and he wasn't married. And so he was basically unaware that Sarah's life would come to an end. So Yaakov requests something. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons we say God bless you when you sneeze is because that's how the souls used to leave their bodies. When they sneezed, that was it. The soul expired. So now when someone sneezes for centuries, maybe millennia, we've been saying God bless you, not just because you might be coming down with a cold, but because you used to actually expire that way. And so God bless you. And then the second thing in Yiddish is zum Leben, which is to long life. So that is a clear indication that it used to be that way. Who wants to hear a very risque joke? I have to pause this. Okay, never mind. All right. So there was once an anti-Semite on a train, and he was a priest of some kind, and he was trying to say something that would be clever and anti-Semitic to the Jewish guy that was on the rabbi that was on the train as well. So he says, Rabbi, I've heard that when we as more refined and the proper religion, the proper faith, when we pass away, our souls leave through our nostrils when we sneeze. But when you Jews pass away, you lower level of people, of individuals, it leaves through passing of gas. That's how it leaves through the backside, right? That's how your soul leaves you. So as if to give him an insult. So the rabbi, quick on his feet, said, if that's the case, you stick your nose up my bottom and we'll live forever. Okay. All right. We'll live forever. Okay, so that is the old way. Now Yaakov said, Hashem, please give us warning. Please give us warning. So Yaakov actually requested a terminal illness. And so it's interesting because I've spoken to people over the years who have said that although it's extremely difficult to watch their loved ones suffer, the opportunity for family to come and to have that closure and to get those last moments in cannot compare to a sudden death that happens, with shock, He didn't have a chance to say goodbye. He left everything hanging. Maybe there was a dispute. Maybe there was, no forgiveness given or whatever it may be. And it just happens without that preparation. It could be very, very shocking and difficult to the heart. So it's sort of it's a bittersweet. It's a curse, but it's a blessing. And that's what Yaakov wanted. So Yaakov said, please bring this into the world, institute this, so I can have an opportunity to bless my children. And it says that Yaakov not only was old like Abraham, but he also was not able to sit up. It says he wasn't well. And at that point, he knew it was time to call his children in to bless.
Is that why we bless every Friday night our kids? I mean, that's routine for us.
It's well, because that's a good time to bless, because that's a time we actually notice our children, and especially when they're busy during the week. But the blessings of Yaakov specifically apply to the blessings that we give our children at a time that is getting close to the end. That's specifically the Jacob style blessing. And you know who else does it? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, because he knows he's coming close to his end, and he calls all the tribes together and he blesses them in the very same manner that Jacob blessed his 12 tribes. So his 12 sons and daughter. So what's interesting is that these things were being just introduced. So Sarah just dies suddenly. And she looked young and she died. Now, why does it say that she died in Kiryat Arba? That was the area around Hebron where Adam and Eve had been buried already. So when that happened, Abraham said, I would like to take my wife and bury her in the same place as Adam and Eve are buried. When I pass away, I want to be buried in that place as well. So it was Abraham who chose the cave of Machpelah in Hebron as the resting place for his family. No one else had gone there besides Adam and Eve. So he purchased it. He purchased it from the owner at the time, whose name was Ephron HaChitti. He was a Hittite, one of the 7 nations of the land. And of course, he says, for you, I don't want to charge you. And he says, no, I have to pay something. He says, okay, for you, I'll take 400 gold coins, 400 silver coins. As if between me and you, what's 400 silver coins? It was actually an unbelievable sum of money for that amount of purchasing, land. So he was a little bit of a shyster. He made it sound like, those guys, when someone says to me, and it very often happens, Israelis, their style, for you, usually this cost $100. But for you, I said, you don't know me. What do you mean for me? It's the first time you met me. It's just now. It's like, no, Achi, my brother. Yeah. So when someone says that for you, you're going to be a little bit suspicious that, that they're changing the prices too easily. But Ephron was a little bit like that, but to the opposite. He went up. He said, between me and you, since I know you have money and you can afford it, I'll charge you 400 silver coin. But he paid for it.
Adam and Eve were
already buried there. It was ready to spot. That's why Avraham knew there was something holy about that space. According to the Medrash, it's actually in a location that's considered to be a place that if the Garden of Eden was on this earth, that's where the Garden of Eden would be located if it was on this earth. There's two places where the Garden of Eden is physically located. One is at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and that's actually more in the Iraq area, and the other one is behind the cave of Machpelah. So anyway, be that as it may, he went and purchased it. Now, I just want to make a footnote here because it's not what I really wanted to talk about tonight. Any place in Israel that was purchased for cash, we've had extra difficulty with. Really interesting to note that. 3 places were bought for money by individuals. Avraham, who Hashem gave him the land of Israel, he said, but to buy this portion, I have to pay him for it. He bought the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. The second was in Shechem, when it came time for Joseph to be buried. That city, that area for Joseph to be buried, was also purchased as a special place for Joseph that was given to him as his descendants to have the city of Shechem, but specifically the area where Joseph is buried in Nablus and Shechem. And then we know the famous story of King David purchasing the threshing floor of Arnava, which was the Temple Mount, the place where the Beit HaMikdash would be built. He couldn't build it himself. He wasn't allowed to, but he wanted to prepare everything for his son Solomon to build it, including buying the land, getting the deed, and setting up the blueprints. And he did that, but he paid for it. Now, what's amazing is that the Temple Mount has been contentious, very hard for us, obviously. Crazy that we are in charge of the Temple Mount. We have people who patrolling and keeping it safe, but we can't go there. We can't do our thing. The world would go crazy. Not that that's a reason why we shouldn't, but that's what would happen. And then you have Hebron, which has always been a contentious area. If you remember from 1998, when there was a big, big push for Hebron to not be given back to the Arabs. And all these songs were being sung, Hebron, Hebron, Shelah. It's the city of our fathers, it's the city of our mothers. Can't give it up, because only 400 Jewish families amongst 500,000 or 400,000 Arabs. And so it's just like, didn't make sense to hold on to it. They held strong, and they kept Hebron. And there's now maybe 450 families that are there now. But just a quick story of Hebron. When I went there, they were negotiating about exactly which areas Israel would keep after really pushing hard that they weren't going to give it all away. And there was satellite images that Bibi Netanyahu was sitting with, at the time was George Bush, and showing that we're keeping this, but nothing else. And there's not going to be anything else built. And they had it all worked out. Now, the night before the signing of the Y Accords, there was one little hut where the yeshiva students would learn. And the Americans said, you've got to get rid of that hut. That's not one of the things that you're allowed to keep. So they took it down. They took it down the day before the signing. The morning of the signing, they're about to sign, and Condoleezza Rice comes in and says, they didn't take down the hut where the students learn. And Bibi said, no, we did. We told the army, took it down. They took it down at 5 p.m. At 2 a.m., the yeshiva students came in and put it back up. And the satellite images picked up that it was back up, and now they're at the table signing, and they're sitting and learning in this little hut. It stayed. It stayed. They never took it down. It's still there. If you go to Hebron, you'll see there's like a white, a big sukkah. It looks like a big sukkah, and it's a place where some of the students learn and study in there. And every single house, they said, we're not giving in, we're not giving in. But it's such a challenge. And this was a place that we bought, we purchased. This is the only Shabbos of the year that Jews are allowed to go there en masse. And 50,000 Jews spend Shabbos on Chayei Sarah in the area of the cave of Machpelah. They pitch tents, they sleep on the floor, they sleep in sleeping bags. One year I went there when I was in Israel. Unbelievable experience to go there for Shabbos. I mean, it's mostly just boys and girls, like students, married folks with their wives sleeping on the grass. But it was really, really wild. And it's the only Shabbos of the year they open up the grave of the tomb of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak is on the Arab side, it's on the Muslim side. We don't have access to Yitzchak the entire year. Abraham, Sarah, Yaakov, Leah, and Adam and Eve, and Rivka, but not Yitzchak. So Yitzchak, they open up on this Shabbos, and Jews can go in and pray while the Muslims just stand around. You can look through the chain and the bars to see where Yitzchak's tomb is, but you can't go in there. So it's crazy. So it's still a struggle for us. The fact that we bought it doesn't mean anything. We have a deed, doesn't mean anything. And the last one, obviously, is Joseph's tomb in Shechem, which is very hard to get to. Poor Joseph. He said, please remember me. Bring me to Israel to be buried. And so there were a few really good, devoted Jews, dedicated Jews that said, we got to take him. We got to bring him. And they found his coffin in the Nile River, which Moshe helped bring up. And they carried it out of Egypt. They missed celebrating the first Pesach because while they were holding the coffin, they were impure. So they had to do a second Passover. And they carried it all the way to Israel, saying, we will not forget you, Joseph. We will not forget you. For 40 years, can you imagine everyone's carrying their gold, their cattle, their things. And these guys are carrying coffins for 40 years. And they finally brought it into Israel, and they took it to Shechem and buried in Shechem. And they purchased it so they know that this is ours. And now, twice a year, we're allowed to take an armored bus, a bulletproof bus, to go in on the risk of getting shot and stoned to go and pray by Joseph's tomb. One of the times it's on his yahrzeit, the other time is the night before Slichot, I think, which is a week before Rosh Hashanah. And they go and pray there. But it's only the really, really, really serious guys that do that. And every now and then people will go in without any protection and they'll just go in and out. There's always a story. But that's, again, the third space of holiness for us that we have trouble with. There's no other holy places in Israel, really, that we have any trouble with. You go to all the other graves of, Cave of Rachel has also been a problem, but you go to the graves of Rambam and all the other Rabbi Akiva, they're all in good places and everyone can go as much as you want. Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik, King David's tomb. But the reason might be is that Hashem may have been telling the people who purchased it, it's not good enough that I gave it to you. You had to go and do a human transaction on top of the gift that I gave you. It's almost like your grandmother gives you a Hanukkah present and then you say, I'm just gonna buy it off you as well. It's like, one second, the gift's not enough? You have to pay for it? I paid for it. I paid for it and I gave it to you. You don't have to pay extra as if to prove that it's yours. Okay, you know what? If you paid for it, you sort it out with your deed now. You see how that works for you. I'm not saying that's a fact, but it's a theory. It's a posited theory as to why those are so difficult to the places that we actually can prove more than anything else that it belongs to us. Coming back to Sarah. Why do we call the portion the life of Sarah if right away, first verse, she passes away? So it's very interesting. The Haftarah of this week is also a very similar story. It's a story of King David getting ready to pass away. He's on his deathbed. Vayikrevu Yemei David Lamut, which Alan Yesner is going to read. I give him a lot of credit, Dr. Yesner. He had not read a Haftarah since his Bar Mitzvah. And this was his father's Haftarah for his father's Bar Mitzvah. And he wanted to pay tribute to his dad on his father's yahrzeit. So this is what he chose to do, to learn a Haftarah that he would say for his dad. So anyway, it's Yikrevu Yemei David Lamut, which is the days of David were coming close to an end. It's a little bit of politics. You think King David had such a great reign. We say, David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. He lived forever. We say, what a great king he was. He had a lot of strife. And at the end of his life, it doesn't seem to get any better. I was with my dad sometimes, it's like there's people making issues in the community. He's like, let it be. So this is what was happening. Like, they came to him and said, you know how you wanted Shlomo, King Solomon, to be the next king? Well, your son Adoniyahu, who is older than Shlomo from a different wife, is starting to declare himself as king. He's got Yoav, who's your general. He's already recruited him as his right-hand man. And he started making announcements that he's going to be the next king after you die. David's like, okay, let him be. I'm too tired for this. All right, I've been through enough. Bathsheba, his wife, who, according to some, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, when he sang the song Eshet Chayil Miyimtza, beautiful hymn that we sing on Friday night, a woman of valor who can find, and it lists all the beautiful qualities of a Jewish mother. He's referring to his mother Bathsheba. He wrote that thinking about his mother Bathsheba because he was married to 300 wives or 700 wives, and there was none of them that fit the bill the same degree as what he saw with his mother. And so he sang that song about his mother. So Bathsheba was a very special woman. And Bathsheba comes into David and says, you told me that our son Shlomo was going to take over. He said, yeah, I know, but he said, well, if Adoniyahu doesn't get sorted out now, he's going to purge the rest of your household, including me and Shlomo, to establish his reign, to strengthen and solidify his kingdom. So are you going to let this happen? So David, with the last strength that he had, last bit of strength, he got up in front of the people. And he said, I'm letting everybody know clearly and unequivocally that my son Shlomo, who's only 8 years old at the time, will become the king after I pass away. He told Adoniyahu, I'm sorry, you're not the king anymore. You're not going to be king. You're a great guy. I love you, my son. You're not the king. Shlomo is the king. And everybody heard that. It was in the front. It's like, it was clear as day, right? Now, not always does this happen, but it was very clear. Now, at that moment when that happened, the entire people, and it was actually Bathsheba that said, "Now it will be King David will live forever. Now it will be King David will live forever." And then the people said, "Long live the king! Long live the king! Yechi Hamelech, Yechi Hamelech." It's in the Haftarah. That's where that statement Yechi Hamelech comes from. So, what does that mean? He passed away just a few days later. What does it mean now the king will live forever? House will reign. We have an opportunity, according to what the Torah is telling us in this week's parasha, to live forever. It requires that we instill into our children the values that are near and dear to us and that we would want to be remembered by. If those values and those ideas are penetrating into their hearts and minds, then even after we physically leave the world, their existence will testify to everything you lived for and everything you stood for. And in essence, it will be, like they said, King David Melech Yisrael, Chai v'Kayam, because Solomon continued exactly what David was. And then after Solomon, they continued after that with some glitches, but they always came back to continue. Chizkiyahu, the great king, always said, "I am just continuing the system of my great-grandfather, King David, the values, his method, his theories, his ideologies, his strategies. All that was near to him and dear to him was being transferred over." So if there's one thing we ever want to make sure we instill in our children is, do you know what's important to me? Do you know why I live the life that I do? Are you able to continue that? Are you able to perpetuate that to the next generation? Because if you do, and this is everything I stood for, this is the entity of my life, then I will indeed make sure I maintain that. It's one of the reasons, in a strange way, why when they gave last names to people, they gave the last names of everything that that person stood for, so that in that family that would continue on. So the Schneider, he was a tailor, but it would always remain in the family. This was the tailor, this was the Schneider, it was known. So even after he's left the world, his children would be known as Schneiders, his grandchildren, even if they weren't, it's like Cohen, right? You would always know you're a Cohen no matter what. So this idea is exactly what happens with Sarah. The reason the Torah says, Chayei Sarah, this is the life of Sarah, because what happens in this week's Torah portion? We see immediately after she dies, Abraham says, "I can't let the life and the legacy of my darling wife, my amazing, holy, righteous woman, just be ended. This is the end of her life. I'm going to look for a woman for my son Yitzchak that emulates the values and the virtues of my wife Sarah." And the Torah tells us something unbelievably beautiful. When Eliezer goes to find the wife, he's looking for one quality, and the quality was of chesed, of kindness, that Sarah had. She was the one who invited everyone to her tent, cooked the meals, welcomed them all in, gave them a lot of love. And that's what he was looking for, because that would perpetuate the life of Sarah. So when Eliezer says, "This is the girl," Rivka comes back, marries Yitzchak. What does the Medrash tell us? It says that she walks in to the tent where Sarah used to live, and when she lit the candles, the same thing happened that when Sarah lit the candles. The cloud of peace and glory fell onto the tent, and the challah lasted and was fresh the whole week. And then it says, I'll find it inside because it's really quite beautiful. Page 147. and verse 67 in the. Oh, it's not 147 for you though.
Oh.
So you have a different one. This is the good Nick. It's pasuk 67, Samach Zayin, chapter 24, the last pasuk of a very long chapter. It says, Vayiviyeha Yitzchak ha'ohla. Yitzchak brought Rivka into his tent of his mother Sarah Imo, of his mother Sarah. Vayikach es Rivka, he took her, vatihilo leisha, as his wife. Vayehaveha, and he loved her. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei Imo. And Yitzchak was comforted for the loss of his mother. It's very rare that the Torah gives us an insight into the emotional state. It's almost like this is just matter of fact, telling you instructions, what you need to do. Yitzchak was comforted in as much as he realized his mother was going to continue living, and now his wife was going to take her place. And so this is the idea of Chayei Sarah, ensuring that it does carry on to the next generation. I just share beautiful. It's interesting. There was a guy. His name was Alfred Nobel. I'm sure you might have heard of this story. Alfred Nobel invented dynamite. Like TNT. Like he invented dynamite. That was his big, and it was actually very useful because it would open up caves and for coal mining and for opportunities to go underground tunnels. Yeah, the whole Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel was all created by dynamite, right? So it was a tremendous opportunity to blast through mountains. So you can get to places. So he was very proud of his invention. Unfortunately, it was also used for other things. Anyway, one day he opens the newspaper and he reads Alfred Nobel's obituary. Someone in the newspaper sent in that he had passed away, and he hadn't. It was somebody else who was called that. But they thought it was him. And he starts reading his own obituary. Like, this is the man, invented dynamite. And the headline was, the man who brought into existence the possibility of killing more people at one time than anyone else before him. That's what he was remembered as. He reads this, and he says, no. First of all, he was like shocked that he read his own obituaries. When somebody dies, you read it used to be very, very common. My grandfather in Montreal used to always open to that page and see who passed away. Today, you have WhatsApp, everyone knows within 3 seconds. But in those days, you would find out who died by reading the obituaries. Anyway, so he decided then and there that he's not going to let it be that he's the guy who's famous for killing more people at one time than anyone else in the history of the world. What a shocking thing to be famous for. And he said, that's it, I'm going to do something. And so he actually worked really hard to create a system of awards to be given to the highest achievement in any category, whether it's science, math, economics, and it became known as the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Prize for Physics, Nobel Prize for Medicine, Economics. He said, if I'm going to be remembered for something, it's going to be for the greatest achievements, not for the most horrific achievements. So that's somebody who realized Chayei Sarah in their lifetime. So Sarah and all of our jobs is to say, I can live a life a certain way, but am I going to be remembered that way? Is that going to be something that's perpetuated? So this, I just thought, was a very beautiful way of sort of summarizing this idea up. And this is at least one way that we can ensure our immortality. So this is a poem that Bar Mitzvah boy I heard him once read, and it was entitled When You Thought I Wasn't Looking. You know about this one? Ever heard it? Yeah. Debbie's been around. She's heard a lot of these. But it's a beautiful one. When you thought I wasn't looking, you hung my first painting on the refrigerator, and I wanted to paint another one. When you thought I wasn't looking, you fed a homeless man, and I thought it was good to be kind to strangers. When you thought I wasn't looking, you baked a birthday cake just for me. And I knew that you cared for me in the little things. When you thought I wasn't looking, you said a prayer, and I believed there was a God that I could always talk to. When you thought I wasn't looking, you kissed me goodnight, and I felt loved. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, and I learned that sometimes things hurt, but it's okay to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, you smiled, and it made me want to look that pretty too. When you thought I wasn't looking, you cared, and I wanted to be everything I could be. When you thought I wasn't looking, I looked, and I wanted to say thanks for all the things you did, even when you thought I wasn't looking. You see, everything we do was always being recorded. Every single thing we did was being recorded, even when we thought no one sees this, not being noticed, just being myself right now. Hours upon hours upon hours, children see what you're doing. And most of the time you weren't putting on a show, you were just being who you were. And that becomes the format of your Chayei Sarah. That becomes the foundation for whether or not you live forever. Yes, if they saw you get angry and mad and all the things that can happen when you lose patience, then they'll continue that, and they'll act that way as well in their lives, and that to their children, and that quality lives forever, at least until somebody stops it. But when we talk about Sarah, here we are, still acting the way she acted, baking the challahs, lighting the Shabbos candles, which we never stopped doing for 4,000 years since she invented it. New York Times, famous little blurb at the bottom on Fridays. New York Times had my uncle, when he had the means to do so, would sponsor a tiny box on the bottom of the front page of the New York Times every Friday for about 8 years, from 1994 to 1999, I think, maybe until 2002. He put a little piece in that said candle lighting times in New York City. This Friday is 5:53, whatever it was. And women and girls light Shabbat candles, Jewish women and girls. So in the year 2000, Y2K, New York Times did a fake heading, fake front page. They did a front page of New York Times 1900, front page of the year 2000, January 1st, 2000, which was that day, and they made another front page for January 1st, 2100. And what did they have there? You know, the robots that are now taking over everything, and you know, we can fly across the oceans in 5 seconds, and there's villages on the moon, all these different things they had there, and the wars and the peace. And then the editor of the New York Times did on the fake page of 2100 candle lighting times 6:53. He's a Catholic editor. So they went over to him. I think it was my uncle actually asked him and said, "That's amazing. How did you put that there?" He said, "Listen, there's a lot of things about the future I don't know. But one thing I do know is that if Jewish women and girls have been lighting Shabbat candles for 3,000 years, that another 100 years, it's not a question. They're going to be the only thing that I can guarantee that will be accurate on this front page of 100 years from now." Sure enough, he'll be right, because all the other things won't be accurate, but that will be. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I heard for the first time that Mashiach has to come by the year 3000, by the year 6000, 6000 of the Jewish calendar. Has to come. It's Shabbat. It's the Shabbat millennial. So I remember in my book, in my notebook, I wrote 253 years to go. Now it's 214 years.
We can do this.
Yeah, we can get there. We can get there. But we have to bring it before the deadline, because if it comes with a deadline, it might not be so pleasant, but it will happen, but it might not be the most pleasant way. It says that we'll have to build the Beit HaMikdash instead of it coming down from heaven. I want to see it come down from heaven. I want to see it come down with what we earned, not with what just happened by default. Anyway, so this is the continuation of Sarah still today. And indeed, no portion is more true than as you read about the passing of Sarah, for it to be called the life of Sarah, because she never really died. The fact that her children, her daughters, and her daughters after that, and her daughters after that, continued to light, continued to bake challah, continued to invite guests, continued to live her life. And you know where else it says it? It says it by Jacob. It says Jacob didn't die either because he had all of his children follow in his footsteps and continue the house of Israel. And so there's this idea that sort of streams through. And perhaps that gives a little insight into the people who say that the Rebbe didn't quite pass away either. And they say as long as there are the shluchim and the Chabad emissaries that are all over the world doing the Rebbe's work and are being like mini Rebbes in their communities, then technically speaking, for all intents and purposes, the Rebbe physically passed away, but lives on more now than he ever did. We can do that too. So that's number one. That's the first secret. Do we have time for the other two? Maybe time for one more. So I want to point out Yitzchak's name. We mentioned it last week. It means laughter, joking around. It's possible that this ingredient, this name, might be the secret not only to happy marriages, not only to a good relationship, but to the secret to the existence of the Jewish people, into how we are able to stay married to Hashem, so to speak. Because we never stopped laughing and he never stopped laughing. I want to point out something. It says that Yitzchak and Rivka, when they first got married, it was a bit of a suspect meeting because it was set up for them. It was set up for them. Avram and Sarah met on their own. It says that Yaakov, so he was forced into marrying Leah, but he looked at Rachel and fell in love at first sight. They took care of their own business. They went to the wells in those days were the place where everyone hung out. The wells was like the bars, the local joints, the local establishments of the day. So they took care of business. Yitzchak was the only one that was set up for him. It says that when Rivka saw him, immediately she fell in love. Yitzchak, it took a little longer, not till after he was married. And by the way, Kabbalah goes into a whole discussion whether love comes before marriage or after marriage, whether love is at first sight or whether it's developed over time. And based on Yitzchak, it's developed over time. And based on Rivka and Yaakov, it's instant. So each one is valid. Each one has its truth. But it was a risk. Would Yitzchak and Rivka be a fit? Especially since their backgrounds were completely different. Yitzchak grew up in a home with a loving mother and a caring father who taught him the values of godliness and divinity. And that's how he was raised, so much so that Ishmael had to be kicked out of the house. Because as the son of only Abraham but not of Sarah, he was a bad influence on Yitzchak, and we didn't want anyone tainting or diluting the beautiful purity of Isaac. Get out of here. And Abraham was skeptical. I don't want to send him away. I want to send him away. He's my son. Hashem says, everything your wife Sarah tells you, listen to her. And what did she say? Send him away. Which from there we learn that when it comes to the children's education, the mother knows a little bit more than the father, intuitively. He's responsible for it, but she's aware. She'll pick up if he's not happy about something. He's getting bullied. The teacher's not good. She'll pick up on it much quicker. That's based on Hashem. Hashem, not just a nice story, but Hashem saying, Abraham, listen to what your wife is saying about your son Yitzchak. She knows. And so he sends him away. Yitzchak's raised in this pristine, beautiful environment of two elderly, saintly parents, showing him the way. Rivka grew up in the house of scoundrels. She grew up in the house of a man, Besuel, who was so low, he was trying the whole time just to poison Eliezer, who was the messenger to come to find Rivka, just so he can get his gold and silver, whatever he was carrying with him, and his camels. So he was just looking to do away with the messenger. Lavan, who was Rivka's brother, was known as the biggest scam artist in history. He was the one who did the whole trick on Jacob and Yaakov and made a lot of problems for him. So the brother of Rivka, the father of Rivka, we know, were really not very good people. They were dishonest. They were tricksters. And even in the Haggadah, it says, who was the first one to persecute us was Lavan Harami. He was the first one to give us a hard time. And that was Rivka's brother. So how on earth did Rivka grow up to be this really amazing, wonderful, good girl? The Medrash refers to her as Shoshana Bein HaParchim, a rose among thorns. Sometimes you have a rose that grows among thorns, and you see its beauty and you sense it even more because of the thorns around them. There's a beautiful story which I won't go into tonight as to what planted the seed in her. It was actually Sarah, many, many years before, left behind one of her students, one of her devoted students. Her name was Devora. Left her behind for the sake of be here in case there's a girl who is born that one day will be a wife. You need to share with her what the right values are. Very special woman, Devora, but we'll save it for Parshas Vayishlach when she passes away, because that's the end of her story. So Rivka grows up this way, but she grew up in such a different upbringing. By the way, imagine two people get a shidduch, like one is a family from a prestigious family where, parents are like respected members of the community. And the shidduch is, oh yeah, the father's in jail and the mother is like, she's on the streets. The brother, he's like currently like in a gang. And yeah, I think it'll be a good shidduch. I think it'll be a good match. It's like, who in their right mind would say that that's going to work, right? Unless you're the Torah, unless you're Hashem and design it. So it was a big risk whether or not they would get married, or they would have a happy marriage. But it's one of the only times between the husband and wives of the stories of Bereshis that we see, not only does it say Yitzchak loved his wife, we don't see that very often with regards to the expressiveness of it says he knew his wife in the biblical sense. He knew her. See, he was intimate with her. That's what knowing means, intimate. But to say love, that's a higher level. And then look at this particular story that happens in next week's Torah portions. We're going to jump ahead.
It doesn't say love?
It does say love. Yitzchak loved Rivka, which was almost not expected, but it was a very deep expression that doesn't appear with the others as much, if at all. But let's just jump to Toldot, because I want to show you something that happens here. This is in chapter 26, verse 8. And it's on page 159 in the blue Chumash. Yeah, I'll get you a blue book next time. Oh, there's one more blue one. Okay. So this is when they were in a visiting town. They were in a town visiting, and in this verse, it says that verse 8. Avimelech, the king of Philistines, looked out of his window of the palace and caught sight of Isaac gladdening his wife Rebekah. Now, Rashi says the simple interpretation was it was a peeping Tom. He was looking through the window and he saw them being intimate. But look at the word that's used in Hebrew. It's not the word for intimacy. The word in the Hebrew in verse 9 is Hine Yitzchak mitzachek es Rivka ishto, was laughing, was joking around. That's the same word as his name. Yitzchak means laughter. Mitzachek, he was playing, he was fooling around. So maybe that's where the word fooling around comes from, right? Probably comes from this word mitzachek. But it doesn't mean that he was being intimate. It means he was laughing with her in a way that brothers and sisters don't laugh with each other. Maybe it was a little bit of that love that he could tell that they were really married. So the words that used is mitzachek. The Torah is telling us something very interesting here, just by glancing at their relationship, saying that they weren't just married. They were making each other happy. They were laughing with each other. What is laughter? What is laughter, my friends, just before we finish tonight? What exactly makes you laugh? What makes you laugh? Not just what makes you happy, but what makes you laugh out loud? LOL. But what is funny? Is it just silliness? It's unexpected. When something unpredictable happens. A joke that's the funniest is the punchline you didn't see coming. And it's like, that's funny. Or that's why slapstick is funny, because it's unexpected behavior. It's not a normal behavior. So it makes you laugh. When someone keeps the other person guessing, that makes them laugh and it makes them entertained. So what the Torah is saying is Yitzchak and Rivka, coming from such opposite upbringings, were always making each other laugh because they were always doing something that the other person wasn't expecting, wasn't used to, didn't grow up with. That's what opposites attract. But it's not opposites attract in a negative way, meaning that like, oh, you have this personality, I have that personality. But it's the opposite attracting in that the person's character is just totally not what you're used to. It's not what you've expected. Like you're a little more quiet and that person just comes out loud and says, you're like, whoa, I didn't expect that to be like such a vociferous response. Sometimes we're not open to this. We're not open to this kind of laughter. We start getting embarrassed, but that all comes from a controlling, egocentric standpoint. But if you let somebody be who they are, you can actually celebrate their differentness with laughter because it's entertaining you. You're so not used to it, and it just makes you laugh. The difference is that you become too used to something, and when it becomes too predictable, it becomes too much the same, it loses a little bit of the spice. It loses a little bit of the excitement. And it just becomes more like, okay, let's just go on with our lives, go boring, and everyone stays on their phones. But when there's something that's different, unexpected, unpredictable, you not only spices up, but it makes you actually laugh, especially if it's also humorous as well. Come in, say a joke. It's like, oh, okay, let's hear a joke. And that is how the rabbis would always start their sermons and always start their study with a joke. Why? And it's in the Talmud. It says Rabbah would start every single class that he gave with a joke. Why? Because it would open up their minds. It would be like, oh, that made me laugh, and now I feel closer to you and I'm ready to absorb and hear what you're going to say. It opens up. Especially if you can laugh at yourself. That unpredictability, because then you're not touching the other person's sensitivities and ego, and you don't have to worry about maybe crossing a line. Someone says, I was just making a joke. So one of my teachers used to always say, it's only a joke if two people find it funny. Mm-hmm. One person finds it funny, it's not a joke. So if you laugh at yourself, right, and you not only make sure that person's not going to be hurt and they'll find it funny, but it actually opens up a little bit of space within you for that person to enter. Because if you never laugh at yourself, you just create a big bubble around yourself. And it's like, it's just me. Right? But if you can laugh at yourself, you're actually welcoming them into that space that you just made. So this idea of Yitzchak and Rivka teaching us not only opposites attract, but that we have to make each other laugh. And the laughter actually creates the spice and the secret to the happiness in the marriage. Even if there are things that might bother you about the person, might be a little bit frustrating at times. But if they just make you laugh, it's just hard to be mad at them. It's hard because it keeps that unpredictability. So it says that why was this something that was noted by the Torah? Like mitzachek and Rivka. Why does it say, okay, they were just making each other happy, misameach, making each other happy? Why does it say mitzachek? Because this idea is the same as us and Hashem. The only reason Hashem wanted us around is that he could laugh with us. And he could say, I put you in a world that you have no business following Torah and mitzvahs, because it is completely materialistic and physical. And then you choose to be unpredictable and say, I'm going to defy everything in nature and everything that's normal. And instead of eating whatever I want, I'm going to say, I'm not going to eat these foods that God doesn't want me to eat. God starts laughing. It's amazing that you guys are doing that. It's against nature. It's unpredictable. You're making it almost as if it is such an enjoyable thing to watch you as you defy predictability, nature, routine, what's called teva, which is just the norm of the way the world goes, the way it's supposed to go. That actually cracks up God. It actually gives him what to laugh about. and makes the whole thing worth it for him, makes it interesting. Otherwise, it's just everyone's just doing what they're programmed to do. And they're going along with the routine, and they're going along with their nature, they're going along with normal. And it gets boring. Show me something that I'm not used to, that I'm not expecting. That's what Yitzchak showed Rivka. Rivka showed that to Yitzchak, and we show it to Hashem. And when Hashem laughs, is happy, comes closer to us. And when we see something that Hashem does, like a miracle, oh, that didn't come out of nowhere. Where did that come from? That's not nature. That's not normal. We laugh in the face of that. Remember, we spoke about last week. We said that if someone tells you, you're going to win the jackpot, right? We laugh at them out of cynicism. But then when we win the jackpot, we also laugh, but this time it's out of incredulity, like just being incredulous. I can't believe I won. No way. So unpredictable, so out of left field, so nowhere that it was never seen on the cards that you just crack up laughing, right? If you haven't fainted. But then you revive yourself and you're just so happy. Why? Because it's so opposite to the nature. So Hashem shows us little pieces of unpredictability with miracles in our life, and we show the unpredictability by us throwing ourselves into the Torah way of living when we have no reason, according to nature, to do so. And that's why the people who are just doing what they're doing because they were raised that way, they were born that way, doesn't make Hashem laugh as much as the Baal Teshuvah, someone who wasn't religious and then turns it around. And Hashem says, "You were king on Wall Street. You had everything. What? You're cracking me up that you decided to choose my way and my Torah instead." And that's really one of the underrated and maybe underspoken secrets to a relationship. Keep the other person not guessing, but curious as to the unpredictability, the nature of your humor, the nature of your ability to make them laugh with you, and ultimately that creates a closer bond. You don't have to be the world's #1 comedian to do this. You actually have to plan a couple of things that you just decide. It might go over the top and they might think something's happened to you. Like, you're gone mad. Like, what's going on? This is not you. This is not you. We've never done this before. Right? So just, keep it within reason. Don't make them look like you've had like a midlife crisis or anything. But but it's like, keep something in the in the bag. It's a surprise. That's why people love giving their wives surprise gifts and surprise parties. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same. It comes from the same place. If I show you something you're not expecting, it'll bring you closer to me. And some people are like, no, I want to see it. Don't do surprise parties. But then when it happens, it's like, wow, okay. It's like that feeling of what it does to open you up to be closer to the other person, just creates that magnetism. So this is number 2. Number 3 we will get to on Shabbos, but I will give you a little preview. I'll give you a little preview.
That means we have to go.
Well, it's 8:46, too late to start, but I'll give you a little preview. Yitzchak and Yishmael were not meant to be enemies. They were not meant to be enemies. Avraham tried doing everything in his power to try and reconcile with Yishmael. And what was Yitzchak doing? I'll share this with you. The Torah says that Yitzchak met Rivka in Be'er Lachai Roi. That was the name of the place. Be'er Lachai Roi, which literally means the well of life I saw. Why was it given that name? Because a few decades before, when Avraham sent Yishmael and Hagar away, Yishmael was sent away and said, you're going to go with your mother to another place. They were dying of thirst. They had no water. And miraculously, she looks up and she sees an oasis. An angel tells her to look up and she sees an oasis. So she names the place Be'er Lachai Roi, the well of life that I saw. Okay, interesting. Only 2 times that place is mentioned in the entire book of Bereshis. Once when Yishmael saved, and now the Yitzchak is there, meeting Rivka, what was he doing there? Why was he there? Because he was praying in the fields. Mincha, afternoon prayer. What was he praying in the fields? Why was he there? Why wasn't he at home? Why wasn't he with his father? He was trying to reconcile with Yishmael. He wanted to come to his brother and say, look, nothing personal. I was just being raised in a different way. You're still included in the family. I want to be your brother. I want to be close to you. He went to that place because that's where he thought he could pray to find where Yishmael was. And he finds him. And it says when Abraham dies at the end of the portion, they bury him together and they both eulogize him together as two loving brothers. But there were a lot of factions and forces that were trying to keep them apart. The first time Abraham comes back to Yishmael to try and reconcile, Yishmael's wife sends him away before Yishmael can have a chance to meet him. When Yishmael finds out, he says, who was here before? He says, oh, it was this old man, and he said he was your father, and he wanted to see you, but your father gave you up. He abandoned you. Yishmael divorced her because of that. Yishmael said, no, I wanted to reconcile with my dad. Who are you to do that? Get out of here. Kicks her out, and he marries another woman whose actual name was Fatima, who Fatima became an important person in the Muslim faith because she was a daughter of Muhammad. But anyway, that was the name of his next wife, was Fatima, who the next time Avram came, she was very gracious to him. Yishmael was out hunting, so he didn't meet him, but she at least gave him food and gave him drink and was hospitable to him. So it's interesting that that became almost a name of somebody who was positive in that faith. There were a lot of attempts of reconciliation. And in the end, by the burial of Abraham, they did reconcile. But there's a lot of forces to bring them apart. And that is when you have one inheritance and two boys, it's like the mother who has the child with King Solomon. Like, what are you going to do? How can you split it in half? So it always required Yishmael to respect Yitzchak and Yitzchak to ingratiate himself with Yishmael. Yitzchak could not gloat over Yishmael. He had to say, you're still my brother, I still love you. But Yishmael had to accept that Yitzchak was the one who got the inheritance. And if they were both able to do that, they could actually be a very powerful duo. About 5 years ago, or 10, maybe now it's coming on to more, 6 years ago, when the first Abraham Accords were being signed, it was like a shock to the entire world. We thought the whole thing was based on whether Palestinians could get their state and divide the baby in half. And that's the only way of peace. Never was the way of peace. It could never be based on this portion. It had to be that Yitzchak ingratiated with Ishmael and said, I respect you. And Ishmael said, I give you and I defer your position and want to work together with you to do the right thing because together we can achieve more. And as the first countries began to do that, we saw the fulfillment of the reconciliation of Yitzchak and Ishmael in this week's Torah portion starting to play out in this generation. It's not going to be with a splitting of Eretz Yisrael. It's not going to be even with the winning of a war and defeating them by putting the foot over them. It's going to be mutual respect. And yes, there are forces always trying to push, especially on their side, fight, destroy, intifada. But as more and more countries, if you realize this, Tajikistan, what was it? It was Uzbekistan who just came over? Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a Muslim country, just decided that it's in our best interest to be with Israel just 2 weeks ago. And before that, we know UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Sudan, and there will be more when Yishmael realizes that the overtures of Yitzchak are not just to oppress, not just to control, not just to say, I'm the big brother, but to say, I respect you, I give you your due, that you have to recognize that we have Eretz Yisrael, and that's who we are. We inherited the land. And those countries they have accepted that. And I believe that the expansion of the Abraham Accords is going to be the ultimate path forward. That has to be the way. It's this week's Torah portion. It's the way. As much as we want to have the full victory, and we should, and we will, and that's all going to stop bloodshed, but it's not the future. It's not the future to control all the Arabs. It's the future is to have that ability to have that mutual respect. That until the Abraham Accords started to happen, it's fascinating that it's called the Abraham Accords, because when did Yishmael and Yitzchak come together at the end of the portion? To bury Abraham. That's when they fully came together at that moment. And I guess we'll just finish with that point. So there's a really beautiful twist at the end. Okay, so then Abraham's lifetime, this is page 149, chapter 25, verse 7. And then, these then are the days of the life of Abraham's lifetime. He lived 175 years. Abraham breathed his last breath and died in the year 2123 in good old age, seeing all his descendants remain loyal to his ideals as he was promised, mellow and content, and he was gathered to his people in the afterlife. His sons Isaac, followed by Ishmael, which means Ishmael said, Yitzchak, I defer to you, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the plains of Mamre. Yishmael, in deference to Isaac's preeminent status in the family, respectfully allowed him to lead the burial procession. That was the moment that they had full. And what happens next? The field that Abraham purchased, that's where they buried him. Abraham died. God blessed his son. Let's just look at the bold for a minute. God blessed Isaac, his son, with good life. Isaac lived in the vicinity of where? Be'er Lachai Roi, which was the place where Yishmael was saved, in tribute to his brother. So there is hope, my friends. There is hope. It can happen again.